It's crazy, offensive, and unforgettable, Blazing Saddles. However, one scene has gone unnoticed for 50 years. A blooper so audacious and bizarre that it was nearly too ridiculous to be true. Deleted moments too graphic to broadcast, fart jokes, Yiddish-speaking cowboys, and covert casting mishaps. This film's reality is even more messy than you might imagine. What was concealed by Mel Brooks? For what reason was one line eliminated before it was ever seen? And how did the last shot feature a complete stranger? Let's find out. First, establishing the scene. The significance of Blazing Saddles. In 1974, when Blazing Saddles debuted in theaters, people were unsure whether to laugh or leave. It broke the fourth wall with a brawl on the movie set, ridiculed racism head-on, and dismantled the cowboy stereotype. It was disrespectful. It was noisy. And it worked somehow. However, why was it ever created? How did the censors manage to keep it alive? What is the massive mistake in Blazing Saddles that has gone unnoticed up until now? You have to know where America was in 1974 in order to appreciate the mayhem and genius of Blazing Saddles. Just now, the Vietnam War ended in disgrace. Watergate had blown up. Nixon was close to stepping down. There was little faith in the government. Despite the legislative successes of the civil rights struggle, racism remained pervasive in American society. Particularly in motion pictures. White men were still portrayed as heroes in Hollywood westerns, while everyone else was just background noise. Mel Brooks had more in mind than simply parodying westerns. He desired to detonate them. Despite being set in the Old West, Blazing Saddles is really about America in the 1970s. The plot is quite straightforward. In order to force inhabitants out of the community of Rock Ridge, a rapacious land developer persuades the governor to name a black sheriff, anticipating that the residents will panic and leave. However, Bart, the new sheriff, who is portrayed by Cleveland Little, turns out to be more astute, shrewd, and competent than everyone anticipated. Bart leads the fight against the villains and the narrow-minded town that attempted to ruin him, and what starts out as a racist scam transforms into a strange, genre-bending insurrection. It appears to be a slapstick comedy at first glance. However, there is a risky concept hidden beneath the jokes and sound effects. That prejudice disintegrates in the presence of laughter and light. Blazing Saddles' power and controversy sprang from this. Even when the N-word was used to make fun of discrimination itself, audiences weren't accustomed to hearing it in a comedy. Toilet humor in popular films was unfamiliar to them. They certainly weren't accustomed to a black hero outwitting all the white men in the community. Brooks was pushing every line that came to mind, and he probably didn't push some of them. The picture was directed by Mel Brooks, but he wasn't working alone. Richard Pryor, the most daring black comic of the day, was one of his co-writers. Pryor was skilled at writing jokes that were hard to laugh at. In addition to being smart and cool, he helped mold Bart into a person who understood the ridiculousness of his circumstances. Due to his past use of dangerous drugs, the studio declined to insure Pryor, who was initially slated to play Bart himself. That choice might have completely altered the movie's tone. Cleveland Little contributed his deadpan humor and Broadway polish. Pryor gave the script a spark. The movie targeted everyone. Actors, politicians, cowboys, racists, and studio owners from the past. Nobody was secure. It disproved the notion that satire needed to be subtly humorous. Being courteous didn't interest Blazing Saddles. It wanted to give you a face slap and then make you giggle at how absurd it was. It didn't care who it upset and blended lofty idea with lowbrow. As long as the point was understood by the audience. The outcome? A movie that is impossible to make nowadays. Even the film's conclusion makes a statement. Blazing Saddles deviates from its traditional Western setting by bursting past the Warner Brothers Studios' actual boundaries and pouring into neighboring soundstages, Hollywood streets, and ultimately a theater that is exhibiting the same film. It's a mess. It's ridiculous. It's brilliant. The characters realize they are in a motion picture. Mel Brooks completes the circle with utter mayhem when the satire devours itself. One of the earliest self-aware conclusions in American comedy, it paved the way for Deadpool and Ferris Bueller. However, a moment so delicate that it took decades for anyone to recognize it managed to get through all of this chaos. You won't be able to unsee it after you've seen it. The filthy joke that became into Blazing Saddles' most enigmatic error is found in Section 2. Blazing Saddles' most startling scene was cut from the film. This is not some backstage mishap, nor is it a prank or blooper. Even Mel Brooks, the man who brought farts to the big screen, felt he couldn't carry out the deleted moment because it is so absurd, so heated, and so indelible. This is where the true twist lies. Until recently, the majority of people were unaware that this subculture even existed. It was concealed in plain view, buried deep inside memories and conversations, subtly alluded to but never displayed. Now that it has resurfaced, everything you believe to be true about the movie is altered. What was the scene, then? What caused it to be cut? And why is it now so crucial? The gorgeous Lily Von Stupp, played by Madeline Kahn, and Sheriff Bart, played by Cleveland Little, have a brief but humorous bedroom exchange in the final edit of Blazing Saddles. It's flirty. It's oblique. However, it pales in comparison to the original footage. The section that was removed shows Lily and Bart in her dressing room following a beautiful dinner, accompanied with the cheeky phrase Schnitzengruben, which isn't exactly subtle. With a strong German accent, Lily's speech pierces the darkness as the lights go out and the screen turns black. Oh, is it accurate to state that you folks are well built? Is it accurate? A pause occurs. The audience is left in suspense. The joke then follows. I'm sorry to disappoint you, ma'am. You're sucking on my arm, though. By addressing the long-standing prejudice about black male anatomy, turning it into a comedy, and then undermining it with a deadpan line, the movie would have taken a huge risk in a single beat. Perhaps more combustible than anything else in the movie, that one scene would have brought together satire, innuendo, race, and physicality. And yet, it didn't get in. Because there were boundaries, even for a movie like Blazing Saddles. In interviews, Mel Brooks has discussed this scene, including one with Conan O'Brien. It just felt like too much going beyond the point of satire and into something that I was afraid would overshadow everything else, he explained. He shelved it after deciding it wasn't worth the risk because he was attempting to balance humor and critique. However, that was not the only instance of a cut. Another line of conversation has surfaced in crew recollections and production notes. Lily Von Stupp is stepping up her charm once more in this scene, getting ready to woo Bart. She appears to be instructing him to remove his ammunition belt. However, it is obvious that the term is intended to sound more like an invitation, spoken in a seductive manner. Although it's a casual line, it has a lot of importance. The third instance is a less clear-cut but no less controversial exchange that was never developed beyond the screenplay. A more interactive version of Lily's well-known seduction of Bart was included in a number of early drafts of Blazing Saddles. In this version, Lily tries to see whether she can see the stereotype that black men are wealthy in addition to asking about it. The scene passes into what would still be seen as extremely contentious terrain and goes straight up to the boundary of physical contact. However, Bart's response is where the humor is. Calm, unimpressed, and eventually contemptuous. The fact that Brooks has now admitted that he regrets removing some of these images is what makes this whole situation so intriguing. He has acknowledged in interviews that he could have overcorrected since he wanted the movie to push the boundaries but ultimately fell short. He was worried that the joke would be misunderstood or worse, that people would not understand it. Perhaps I got scared, he suggested in one conversation. The question is now, if those scenes had been preserved, how would Blazing Saddles have appeared? Would it have been outlawed, forgotten, or buried, or would it still be hailed as a classic? Although there isn't a definitive solution, it does teach us something valuable. It wasn't just shock for the sake of shock. These sequences were a part of a broader attempt to undermine Hollywood storytelling's genteel exterior. Brooks wasn't merely attempting to amuse you. He aimed to unnerve you by exposing racism as a stupid set of ideas supported by ignorance, fear, and power, rather than just as a problem. At that point, Blazing Saddles transcends its status as a comedy. It establishes a standard for sarcastic cinema. This film exposed nerves, cut deep, and dared the audience to recoil by using humor like a surgeon's knife. The scenes that survived are renowned for their audacity. What about the scenes that were omitted? The edge Brooks was walking on is shown to us. They demonstrate to us how nearly he went farther. They also serve as a reminder that the actual tale may not always match what is depicted on TV. That's what nearly got in. Section 3. Farts, Chaos, and Unintentional Genius. The campfire scene in Blazing Saddles, where cowboys eat beans and can be heard passing gas, is one of the movie's most famous scenes. The first in the history of Hollywood. There had never been a full-sound flatulence gag in a major motion picture in 1974. Mel Brooks also didn't just let it happen. He intensified. He really went back and added extra fart sounds in post-production after the first cut. Hold on, since the test audiences were laughing so hard that they were unable to hear the joke's conclusion? And because Brooks was aware of something the studio was unaware of? Toilet comedy wasn't all that this was. There was more to this. Westerns had idealized the cowboy for decades. Strong, quiet, valiant, stoic, and always tidy. Brooks wished to dispel that misconception. He intended to portray cowboys as actual, sweaty, odorous men who overindulged in food and slept in the dirt rather than as mythological characters. Audiences adored it, but it ruined the lovely, polished image Hollywood had built over decades. Warner Brothers execs, however, were not amused. They referred to the scene as lowbrow, vulgar, and meaningless. By ignoring their objections and preserving the sequence, Brooks contributed to a redefining of what was acceptable in popular humor. Sound effects were only one aspect of this dedication to chaos. It continued all the way to the movie's pivotal conflict, which spills onto the Warner Brothers lot itself from the made-up town of Rock Ridge. The last scene is a purposeful, ridiculous breach of the fourth wall. After fighting their way through fictitious saloons and colliding with a musical number, the characters find themselves on a Hollywood street where the action takes place in front of an actual theater. It's supposed to seem crazy and chaotic, but even in that mayhem, something unexpected happened. A man in a sweater strolls quietly into the center of the shot as the actors dash out of the studio gate and into the street. He isn't an extra. He's not dressed up. He doesn't appear in the movie. He occurred to sneak onto a live set while the cameras were rolling, just a random bystander. Mel Brooks instructed the team to leave him in rather than editing the shot or attempting to remove him. It's amusing. He was correct. An already ridiculous scene is made much more so by the man's presence, confused, careless, and unaware. He unintentionally became a living blooper that was never fixed, becoming a part of the history of film. These unplanned scenes ended up being the film's strongest points. The foundation of Brooks's filmmaking approach was unpredictableness. His actors were encouraged to improvise. Use timing to break character. The best parts of the movie weren't always in the screenplay. As the Waco Kid, Gene Wilder's delivery was so casual and laid back that he frequently altered his lines on the spot. Bart's intellect came from Cleavon Little's quiet sarcasm, dry tone, and facial expressions. It wasn't written down. Several of Lily Von Stupp's most well-known lines, such as her breathy, off-key rendition of I'm Tired, were improvised by Madeline Kahn, who performed the role. Brooks didn't simply let this mess happen. He desired it. He thought that spontaneity, not control, was the source of comedy and that a well-timed gaffe may occasionally be more hilarious than a prepared joke. The scene with the Native Americans who speak Yiddish is the clearest example of that idea. A troop of warriors on horseback surround Bart and his family in a flashback to his early years. It appears to be the start of a bloodbath. The tribal chief, who is portrayed by Mel Brooks, then talks. Furthermore, it isn't an indigenous language like Apache or Sioux. It's Yiddish. Fluent delivery of complete sentences. The other fighters give a nod of approval. Even Shabbos is shouted. It's startling. It's hilarious and bizarre. What does that mean, though? Brooks was well aware of his actions. He was drawing attention to the historical treatment of Native Americans in Hollywood westerns by having them speak a Jewish accent. They were nearly never given actual language, frequently shown as the other, a foreign foe, and almost ever humanized. Brooks gave them Yiddish to highlight the flimsiness and folly of those depictions. Although the moment is unexpected, it remains because it makes a genuine statement. The opening music of the movie similarly reflects this combination of humor and absurdity. The well-known Western balladeer Frankie Laine, who is recognized for his intensely emotive voice, performs the song, simply titled Blazing Saddles, with complete honesty. His voice is sincere, strong, and rich. And Brooks wanted precisely that. He instructed the crew to keep the comedy a secret from Laine. Laine was singing the theme of a tragic epic in his head. Every note and line is delivered as if they were in high noon. However, the lyrics, which are rife with cliches and extravagant imagery, convey an entirely different message. The outcome is blatantly ironic. A performance that never understands the humor anchors a song that is so serious that it becomes absurd. Mel Brooks recognized that humor wasn't only about cracking jokes. At times, the goal was to create a universe so ridiculous that viewers couldn't stop laughing. At times, it was about allowing mishaps to happen and inviting them in. All of the risque jokes, toilet humor, and bloopers that made it into the final film all contributed to the same notion that mayhem could be strewn. There was no need to polish that comedy. It simply had to be bold. Blazing Saddles stands out from other comedies of its era because of this. There are many situations in the movie that seem like they might collapse, but that's part of the appeal. The turmoil and improvisation are where the humor is found. The decisions made in real time that weren't polished in the editing room. Thus, the answer to the question of how a film that was full of fart jokes, phony horses, and unintentional walk-ons ended up becoming one of the most cherished comedies in movie history is this. It was no coincidence. It was intentional anarchy that was fearless enough to permanently alter the norms of comedy, controlled enough to function, and wild enough to feel genuine. Section 4. Warner Brothers vs. Brooks, the studio battle. Warner Brothers went into a panic when they viewed the final cut of Blazing Saddles. There was no sound in the screening room. The executives did not chuckle. They failed to clap. According to one, it was too obscene for viewers in the United States. One person referred to it as career-ending. Mel Brooks, however, was certain they were all mistaken while he was seated in the same room. What occurs when a filmmaker has faith in a film that the company wishes to destroy? What occurs when Hollywood's largest entertainment firm attempts to bury a movie only to have it become a cultural phenomenon? Blazing Saddles was not the only film directed by Mel Brooks. It belonged to him. His contract gave him the ability to make final cuts. This meant that without his consent, the studio was legally unable to change or censor his film. It is a dream for most filmmakers. It turned into a nightmare for Warner Brothers. Because the studio was more alarmed by the movie's violation of all the rules than anything else. The CEO of Warner Brothers at the time, Ted Ashley, made it plain that he wanted the movie to be buried quietly, respectfully, and without any fuss. Industry insiders claim that Ashley instructed his team to surreptitiously withdraw the movie after it was released in a few big locations. Testing the waters was the plan. No one would notice if it failed. They might hold the filmmaker accountable if it created controversy. It was a standard strategy for films that the studio didn't support. Mel Brooks, however, had other ideas. This type of opposition was nothing new to him. With its story about a musical named Springtime for Hitler, his previous picture, the producers, had already pushed people outside their comfort zones. He had won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay for it. Blazing Saddles did not, however, guarantee success. It was more dangerous. The volume was higher. Furthermore, it was not interested in being cautious. What he had made, Brooks thought, was more than just a joke. It was the type of humor that caused individuals to reflect on their surroundings. This will make people laugh more than they've ever laughed before, he remarked. But because Blazing Saddles production had a rough beginning, that belief would be put to the test almost soon. The casting procedure was a complete failure, to start. The original candidate for the role of Sheriff Bart was Richard Pryor, who co-wrote the script with Brooks. His brilliance, grit, and humorous timing were all just right. However, there was a single issue. He was refused insurance by Warner Brothers. Pryor had a history of using dangerous drugs, and he had just been arrested for possessing drugs. He was classified as a known danger by the studio. He couldn't lawfully work on set without insurance. Pryor continued to write, but Cleveland Little, a Broadway performer who had no significant film credits at the time, was cast in the part. The casting problem wasn't limited to that. Gig Young was initially cast as the Waco Kid, an accomplished actor who has won an Academy Award. It made sense on paper. Young had the dry delivery and the grizzled appearance. However, the studio failed to identify the issue in time. Young struggled with alcoholism. He passed out while filming the scene in which he awakens in a jail cell on his first day on set. Production ceased. Brooks was enraged. He needed a last-minute substitute. He then gave Gene Wilder a call. Brooks and Wilder trusted one another, having previously collaborated on The Producers. Wilder instantly agreed when Brooks explained the Waco Kid concept, a reformed gunfighter with a golden heart and a drinking problem. The following day, he took a plane to the scene and began filming. His performance would later rank among the movie's most recognizable elements. In the midst of the commotion, Wilder added a sense of strangeness and serenity. His relationship with Cleveland Little and his impeccable timing provided the film with the emotional center it required to maintain its realism amidst the ridiculousness. On paper, Blazing Saddles didn't appear to be the winner, though. When John Wayne was offered a cameo in the movie, he flatly refused. It was too blue for his image, he claimed. That's Hollywood lingo for too dirty. According to reports, Wayne informed Brooks, "I'll be first in line to see it, but I can't be in it." Such a response merely served to highlight the film's seeming risk to insiders. It didn't help that Brooks was in complete control. Instead of improvisation, studios prefer predictability. However, the outcomes astounded everyone when the movie eventually debuted in February 1974. The New York, LA limited release. And Chicago's popularity skyrocketed. A few theaters continued to operate indefinitely. Warner Brothers rushed to increase distribution after discovering they had misjudged the situation entirely. The film that was supposed to be buried unexpectedly became the year's biggest comedy smash, grossing nearly $100 million at the conclusion of its run. All because of a single filmmaker who chose to fight a whole system in order to realize his vision. The main character in Blazing Saddles was supposed to be Richard Pryor. He was the obvious choice to play Bart, the cool, witty black sheriff at the heart of the plot, and he co-wrote the movie and helped craft its scathing gags. However, the studio took over when it came time to cast the part. Due to Pryor's history of using dangerous substances, including a recent arrest for possession of drugs, Warner Brothers declined to insure him. This indicated that he was deemed too dangerous to hire from a legal and production standpoint. One executive even called him a famous sniffer within the company. The movie was based on Pryor's voice and vision, but he couldn't be in it without insurance. This put the production in a challenging situation. In a movie that was taking enormous artistic chances, they needed a lead who could keep up with the fast-paced humor, bear the weight of the satire, and hold their own. That individual turned out to be Broadway-credited stage actor Cleveland Little. Bart felt a new type of energy from Little. Refined, cool, and a little aloof. He gives a controlled, sardonic, and charmingly dry performance. Little portrayed Bart precisely, and it worked, whereas Pryor might have played him with more fire. The racial satire was sharpened by his delivery. Little doesn't exaggerate the fact that Bart had to pull a revolver on himself in order to get away from a lynch mob. Despite the ridiculous circumstances, he maintains his composure. It was crucial to strike a balance between humor and seriousness, which is one of the reasons the movie is still popular today. However, it didn't get any simpler from there. Gig Young, an Academy Award-winning actor with a track record of playing serious parts, was first cast as the Waco Kid. It made sense on paper. The Waco Kid is a renowned gunman who hides out in the municipal jail after becoming an alcoholic. However, he also struggled with alcoholism. Production was stopped when crew personnel recognized the Waco Kid was suffering from alcohol withdrawal in his very first scene, in which he hangs upside down in a jail cell. He was promptly sacked by Brooks, who then started searching for a replacement. He only needed to glance. Gene Wilder, who was renowned for creating odd, sensitive, and erratic characters, had previously collaborated with Mel Brooks on The Producers. In a panic, Brooks called him. After accepting the part, Wilder left the following day and began filming practically right away. His portrayal of the Waco Kid, which was equal parts bone-dry sarcasm and spaced-out wisdom, became one of the movie's most memorable features. The pandemonium surrounding him was somewhat subdued by the serene, fantastical element that Wilder supplied. There was an instant and seamless chemistry between him and Cleveland Little. When combined, they produced a dynamism that reflected the whole movie. A couple of strangers navigating a crazy world. Hedley Lamar, the greasy, avaricious antagonist who planned to demolish Rock Ridge, was portrayed by Harvey Korman. His portrayal straddles the boundary between sketch humor and Shakespearean villainy. Corman's delivery of his words is so theatrical that they almost veer into parody but never quite do so. The character worked because of that control. Not only was Korman amusing, he was dedicated. He handled Lamar more like a human than a cartoon character. His lines landed more forcefully as a result. Everyone mispronounces his name as Hedy, a reference to real-life actress Hedy Lamarr, which is one of the film's recurring jokes. The genuine Lamar threatened to sue Mel Brooks for appropriating her name because the joke was so persistent. Brooks reached a private settlement rather than pursuing the matter in court. She should have been flattered, he joked afterward. How many villains are named after Hollywood royalty, after all? Then there was Alex Karras as Mongo, the irrepressible savage who delivers one of the most bizarre scenes in the movie, rides into town on a bull and punches a horse. In the game of life, Mongo is but a pawn. Karras wasn't a professional actor. He was selected to the All-Decade squad for the 1960s after spending 12 seasons as a defensive tackle with the Detroit Lions in the NFL. He was cast by Brooks because he needed a comic who could also have a commanding physical presence. Karras did a fantastic job. Mongo was more than a bully thanks to his deadpan timing. He evolved into a strange, endearing force of nature that contributed to the film's erratic cadence. Every one of these performers contributed something vital to Blazing Saddles. Brooks trusted them to take risks, improvise, and change the movie as it happened. They were able to survive the production's turbulence because of this. Furthermore, they flourished in it. They laughed at the ridiculousness. They took on roles that might have easily failed. They also realized that the movie wasn't merely making jokes. It was conveying a message. That took timing, expertise, and a desire to push boundaries. These were no ordinary performers going through the motions in a studio. They were collaborating with a director who authorized them to fully commit. Thank you for viewing. Please remember to like if you like this. Leave a comment and subscribe. For more thrilling content, click the next video.